Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. DJ, thank you for joining me for my very first podcast or video cast series, DevSecOps, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, DJ. So let's get this kicked off. I know that I met you a couple years ago for the very first time at DevSecOps days. I don't know if you even remember that, but I remember hearing you speak.
I think I remember it was DevSecOps days at RSA, right?
It was.
Yep. I remember meeting you. You were in the Sonotype area at the back of the meeting room, right?
I was one of those groupies that just wanted to get to know you a little bit. So
Yeah, I think you were there for John Willis, maybe not for me.
yeah, I don't know about. Yeah, he's a good guy as well. But no, I remember Derek and Mark always spoke very highly of you and enjoyed listening to your work. So appreciate you taking some time to chat. So I know that you were at Aetna and CVS for a while. I mean, can you tell everybody what you did previously?
Yeah, I was on the software security team in the global security organization. So I was doing software architecture, security architecture, and really was focused on getting a lot of our security controls up and running across the ecosystem, especially when it came to static analysis and security testing, open source software management, container vulnerability security or container security analysis. And a little bit into the dynamic analysis. So I call those the four horsemen of the DevSecOpolis, and I've done a couple of talks over the past couple of years with it because there's been happiness and nightmares with all four of them.
Right.
Actually, with three of them, not with the fourth one.
That's funny. That's good. That's a good name there. So I mean, DJ, there's a lot of people out there that are trying to build out a DevSecOps practice. First of all, before we jump into that, what's your thoughts on the name DevSecOps?
I hate it.
You hate it.
Well, it's as I'm wearing a shirt, DevSecOps Days Austin.
That's why I figured I could ask
Karthik and Ernest and James Wickett for this. DevSecOps is an interesting one. We started using it about 5-6 years ago in the community, and I remember getting ribbed for it a lot, where people were like, "Hey, you're at a DevOps conference. You got a lot of cojones to come out and say that, it's DevSecOps, right?" And I don't know if we've done the world a disservice by calling it DevSecOps, or everyone jumping on that that term. But regardless of what you call it, I've called it rainbow, monkey, unicorn, pony a lot. It doesn't really matter, right? It's really it's programming, and I think security being part of the conversation is better than it being an afterthought. So, I'm happy with the term. I still think it's DevOps, and really at the end of the day, it's just programming. So, a love-hate relationship with the term. I think they're synonymous to an extent where people might not think so.
I would agree, and I hear the argument a lot, and I know some people don't like the terminology, but just for this sake, we're using it just because it correlates with what we're talking about.
What do you think, Zach?
I mean, I think so I've read the Phoenix Project a couple times. I mean, and really, when you look at security as a practice, that would be baked into to DevOps, right? When it's truly done correctly. So I know a lot of times though security has been an afterthought, right? Because I talk to a lot of DevOps people at these DevOps events, and security is the last thing on their mind. So I could see the reason why people have wanted to put that into the terminology to get people to think about it. But ultimately, when DevOps is done well, I think it includes security, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So when one of the things that I wanted to bring you on to talk about, DJ, is you've built out these reference architectures at Sonotype. Some of them have been extremely complex, right? When you first started, I know you've done some things on helping people just where do they think about starting. So people that are just beginning down this DevSecOps practice, putting security into their DevOps pipeline, where do they start? What would you recommend? I mean, is it culture that they need to focus on first? Is it tooling? I mean, what would you recommend to somebody?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a sort of a cop-out answer, but think there's multiple places where an organization needs to focus. Just saying that you want to get into the transformation and start adopting the practices of DevOps and DevSecOps, that's 9/10 of the battle, right?
Right.
And usually that's, DevOps has traditionally been sort of this bottom up approach. And then, now that people are starting to accept the term and accept the ideology, you're starting to get this top down buy-in of that.
Right.
And culture is probably the most important part of that, right?
Yep.
Culture, technique, and tools. So the first thing you need to have is that communication between each other, right? Before you even look at a reference architecture, you even think about what kind of tools that you want to put into your pipeline, or say, oh yeah, we own XYZ tool, so we got to jam this in because we already own it, right? Is doing yourself a disservice, and you could be setting yourself up for for failure at that point, which you can learn from anyway. But the second being the technique is like, how do you build software? And that's looking at the teams. And large organizations like where I came from is, there's hundreds and thousands of teams doing different projects. Each one is really, could be different. You can't have, hey, this is everything that this team needs to do all the way across the organization.
Right.
So it has to have that compassion for each team doing their own thing, or having their own culture and their own techniques of building things, because they have different talent in different areas of the world, maybe different languages.
Yep.
So that's the second thing, is look at that technique of how you build it. And what, at the end of the day, what are you trying to deliver to your customer, right? We're not just developing software for fun. And then the third thing is like, look at the tools that you need to enable your technique. And things that you can educate people on from a cultural perspective, and that people can use and really understand what these tools do, and make sure they give value to the your software development tool chain.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, one of the things that you're just talking about, right, especially at the larger organizations that you worked in the past, there's multiple groups, right? You don't want to be so restrictive. You even mentioned, maybe that they might have their own culture for that group. How do you still, though, implement a culture, right, for security? And I know one of the things that I hear a lot out there is, and Brian Fox, right, our CTO, mentioned, developers are the front line of security today. So
yeah, they absolutely are.
How do we empower, developers to continue to do what they're best at, which is deliver software quickly, right, to produce an excellent product for the customer, but also to have the reinforcements of security be front of mind when they're building that software out.
Think about trench warfare in 1911, right? In world, or not even 1911, like in World War I, right? You'd have the grenadiers in there with the rifle artillery, like everybody was together in that trench.
All right.
Right. You can't have the guys with the grenades, throwing them from 50 feet back because they just landed the trench where you are and it blows up.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, from that kind of analogies, thinking about from a security organization perspective, understanding if you're technical security or not technical security.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not technical security, don't even get involved with it. Right. That's like your threat hunters, like just do what you do. The technical security folks need to work together with the developers, and that could be part of the team as a security maven, or some the development front line that knows how to throw that grenade just as well as the grenadier in the back. Yeah. But there, you have to be working together, and you have to speak the same language, right? I've told the story a lot about working at my previous employer was part of this meeting where I was asked, like, what group are you part of? Because you're talking about Kubernetes and all these technical things and like software security, and it just mind explosion, because nobody had ever seen somebody talking the same language from a security organization. So it's not about like surprising everybody and coming in and saying, hey, I'm security. It's like, hey, what are you trying to do? Let's secure it. And a lot of times we're finding, like, Google's done some studies, we've done some studies at Sonatype, that front line of development is just as interested in making software secure as the security organization is. Right. And we have to respect and understand what each approach is to make it successful. At the end of the day, it's all about getting that product to the customer, and it's a shared customer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and one other thing that comes to mind, DJ, is you mentioned earlier, right, executives and getting leadership to buy in, right, from really having that support to drive down. How important is that? And maybe somebody that's maybe a director level trying to get access to that. Is there any tips that you can say on how to get executive buy-in on building that out?
Well, you got to show that value,
Yeah.
right? Like, what is the value of adding security into
Right.
your automated tool sets or into development? And you can just look around um, and see the breaches compound, right?
Right.
We talk about breaches all the time at Sonatype, and we take a look at a lot of these things and say, hey, why did this happen? I'm doing the state of the or not the state of the software supply chain, but that's a great publication we do. But
Right.
working on the 2020 DevSecOps community survey, and we're seeing that the security breaches continue. And there's some really interesting trends over the past 4 years that we've noticed. And executives and that leadership level is starting to move towards competitive advantage now.
Right.
From the risk and compliance side of the house, and that's normally what you're going to start integrating security with. So approaching it from a business perspective, like a product owner, is like, how do you get that executive buy-in? It's talking about what is going to protect your customer, right? And not necessarily about what's going to check boxes on the audit.
Right.
And it's really responsible software development, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that the general population would love to use a piece of software that leaked all their personal health information online,
Right.
right? And the producers of the software, which I was part of that team that was producing these kind of secure software applications, I didn't want to use that vulnerable software. I didn't want our customers to either, because we're all in this together. So, getting that buy-in, it's going to vary from place to place. And it's going to vary from product to product and objective to objective. But you need to have that buy-in so people understand what the value is for you securing your application, whether it's compliance, whether it's risk, whether it's competitive advantage, whether it's to address your own infrastructure and not getting attacked yourself. Right. So there's a lot of different risk factors that you have to take into consideration.
That's great. So, I mean, really to kind of wrap this up, DJ, because my goal was not to make these too long, and I know I'll probably want to circle back with you on some things, but just you're building a lot of resources for the community, right? Now you're with Sonatype, you're a technical evangelist, and that's the reason why I always enjoy talking, right? You just get down to the tech and you can say what you think. Reference architectures, there's some new ones that you're building. Is there any resources that people are trying to put tooling and or just think about what those pipelines would look like, resources, culture? I mean, where should they go? Any resources that come to mind, maybe something that you're making or anybody else that you could point them to?
Well, a couple places, I publish a lot of things on my Twitter feed. It's at DJ Schleen. And you'll see a bunch of things there. There's links to my YouTube channel where I do little walkthroughs and that kind of thing. And I talk to some pretty interesting folks in the community, the DevSecOps community. Have a show called DevSecOps Kung Fu or DevOps Kung Fu that's there as well. But for documentation resources, there's a lot of the stuff that I've published is available at Sonatype under the community area and the blogs area. Including that big reference architecture, which is the boil the ocean view, right? It's a possibility diagram. Don't think you're ever going to implement that. Like, I've never implemented all of that. These are all the ideas and all the things that I have done, and the things that I wanted to do. But the essentialist reference architecture that I've been working on, I've just completed that, and that should be hitting sonatype.com soon. And we'll also have that on the Sonatype blog and be publishing that on the Sonatype Twitter feed as well. So there's some more resources coming out. My advice to everybody, though, is keep it simple. Look at the biggest impact for security. Test that out on one application track and start growing it and making sure that your adoption is successful and making sure that you're not adding any more disruption or any unnecessary disruption to your developers.
That's great, DJ. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for taking the time to jump on and again just share your thoughts to the community. If you wouldn't mind, maybe jump on LinkedIn and see if there's any questions that these guys might have to post to y'all. Also send them your way. Anyways, we're looking forward. I know next up that I'm going to be interviewing is going to be Sal from Duke Energy. And then I think there's a couple more people I already have lined up next week on the calendar. So stay tuned and look forward to sharing sharing more information and more stories with you guys. Thanks.
Thanks,
again.
Zach.
Yep.
Cheers.